Word on this computer. There we go. Alrighty. So what standards must be met, or what standard must a full body harness meet if manufactured on or after July 1st?
CSA.
Yep, the CSA standards.
Who was it before?
That's a good question. I'd imagine, I don't know. I don't know who it was before. I know it wasn't WCB or PPE. So PPE just stands for Personal Protective.
Yeah.
WCB is Workers' Compensation Board. It could very well have been the ULC. So what ULC, which you've seen on electronic devices a lot, what that is the Underwriters Laboratory. And so they do standards and inspections as well. I'm not sure. That's something I'd have to look into. And I mean, 2000.
It's also possible there was no required standard.
Yep, that is possible too. I don't imagine that would have been the case. 2009 wasn't that long ago, but yet again, I'm not entirely sure. So all we need to know for sure is right now, I'd imagine your full body harness isn't going to be 11 years old, so it should probably be up to CSA standard. How often do you have to inspect your fall arresting equipment?
C.
See, before use on each shift. Yes. And I actually would recommend, so if you use your equipment and then you take it off to go for a coffee break, before you put it on again, you should inspect it as well. Every time you use it. Why would you think that might be?
Anything could happen between that time.
Yeah, or I mean, maybe even you damaged it. So while you were working with it on, you cut it. You didn't notice. You take it off, go for coffee, come back, put it on, and now you fall, and then it rips. You got to inspect it every time because said it is absolutely right. You don't know what happened.
It could likely have, you could set it down in oil or any other fluid by accident that would wreck it, or someone could spill something on it or tear it or drive over it, or
any number of things can happen. I mean, we've all hopefully all had a bit of experience in a shop now, and we've seen that anything can happen. Anything can happen. So I didn't talk about this specifically, but what does the ILM say find in your reading?
B.
What's the maximum distance? Yep. Minimum distance, the ladder
Minimum.
protrude above is 1 meter. So this is when we were doing the trailers and we were on the roof of them. If you use a ladder that sits along there, an extension ladder, it needs to protrude at least 1 meter from the top of the trailer before you can climb up it, okay? Safety factor for scaffolding systems.
be
B, 4 times the load that is imposed on them. Number 5. So at what height do you have to have a guardrail erected for a temporary work area? So what height do you need to have railing?
B.
It is
B, 10 feet.
10 feet. Yep, it is 10 feet. Yet again, a lot of these numbers, like, it's going to be a matter of knowing that there is a standard and where to find it.
I actually knew that when I started working at camp work because they have so many handrails everywhere, and they learned that. It's stuck in my head.
Depending on where you work, these might be something that are drilled into your mind over and over again, or you might have never heard it because it's applied to you, right? So it's a very big book full of all kinds of rules to try and cover everything. And so there's going to be things that you've never heard of in there. So when you're conducting a hazard assessment related to lifting and handling a load, your employer must consider what?
A.
A, yeah. This is something similar to what you have to consider too. Weight, size, and shape of the load. Not an example of recommended lifting technique. Which one of these is not?
C.
I don't know if I was asleep during this question or what, but I don't really understand begin lifting at knee level. So like how do you get it off the ground? when you're at knee level?
Yeah, it's so I think they're talking about, I'll scroll back up to the picture here where the gentleman is something up. So I think they're talking, if you need to pick it up here, if it's on the ground, you go down onto your knees and he sort of lifts it up with his arm. Then he doesn't stand up until he's got the load in his hand like this. Instead of standing up from this position where the load is still on the ground, you use your arms to lift it up to your knee position there, and that's when you stand up then with your knees. I think that is what they mean by that. Does that make a little more sense for that?
Yeah. That now that I see the picture, it's kind of
Yeah.
more sense.
It's sort of like go down onto your knees and lift it up into your arms. And I know I say lift, I guess cradle it in your arms and then lift with your legs is what the point of it is. And what they're saying, it is definitely not recommended to lift anything above eye height. So that's what they're talking about. You don't want to lift anything higher than your eye level. There's another interesting thing. So let's say you have to grab something off a shelf. So the shelf is just above your head. The box there, you can reach, you get on your tippy toes and you can pull it off. Should you do that?
Probably not.
No, there's a couple reasons why not. First of all, it's high and an incorrect position. You're going to have your hands overextended and your arms are going to be overextended. You're going to be stretched out. Maybe that weighs a lot more than expected, and so it's going to come down a little quicker. Or maybe there's something on top of that box that you can't see, and so when you go tipping it towards you, all of a sudden a whole bunch of loose bolts come piling down on you. Okay, you don't want to take things on or off at higher than eye level because you can't see what's happening. That's very
The question is, though, what is not an example
a
of
recommended
recommended lifting technique?
lift no higher than. What is not an example of recommended lifting technique? Avoid off. Yeah, so that's an example of not an example. Lift a load smoothly is an example. Lift no higher than eye level is an example of recommended lifting technique, and belaying lifting at knee level. So that means lift no higher than eye level, thing you should not do.
Someone has your background noise again.
I can hear it. Someone has their microphone unmuted still. So one thing I can assure you, and I think if Clint is still here, he'll talk about this too. This is just a housekeeping thing. When is something not an example of something? These questions we try to avoid because it can confuse you just thinking about what the question's asking. Okay, what is not an example of recommended lifting technique? So something that you would not want to do is lift higher than eye level. Lift no higher than eye level. So this is not an example of recommended lifting technique. Anyhow, we'll keep moving on. Don't stress about some of the wording in some of these questions too much. The goal of proper lifting technique. So this is an important one. Why do we talk about bending at the knee and not at the back?
For your own health.
For your lower back.
It is to eliminate the load stressing on the soft tissues of your lower back. Does anyone have back injuries? I think I asked that. Like, they are not fun. If you've ever with pain in your back, you probably would give almost anything to go back in time and not do what you did that injured it, or find out what was that injured it. It's very debilitating. So
yeah, I messed up my back when I was 14 when I worked as a shop hand. They asked me to go move like a bunch of cat teeth and a bunch of old brake drums in there, and I had to move about probably 5 drums and a bunch of other stuff all day, and it got pretty stressful on the back.
Yeah, that's no fun at all. And yeah, like that's why be very, very conscious of how you're lifting things. Once you've injured yourself, it's never going to be the same again. And some of you are young still, so you maybe think, oh, it does go back. There'll be a point where you'll injure yourself and it won't ever be the same. And it just gets from there.
Sometimes it's not even a heavy item. Like I've seen guys strain their backs just from barely lifting anything. It's just the way they lift it, right?
It is. It's actually incredible. I last intake, and it's a silly story, but I was just sitting on my lazy boy, like eating popcorn. And if you've ever had an injury, you know how easy it is to re-injure it. I just twisted over to grab something and it just sort of twings your back, and like then you have pain for the next week, right? It can be very, very. Once it's injured, it's so easy to injure it again, and it doesn't take much. It doesn't take as much as you think to injure yourself. So
Ergonomic hazard.
ergonomic hazards are very important. So
Yeah, a few years ago, I was helping my parents move, and me and my brother were taking a stove out of the basement and had to carry it around an awkward corner. I went to go pick it up, and I basically pulled my lower back.
ouch. Ouch.
I was done helping them move for the rest of the time.
Yeah, I'd imagine so, yeah. So, how is a safe working load defined? So yeah, they define it as the braking strength divided by the safety factor. So if you know the braking strength is 10,000 or 1,000 pounds, and the safety factor is 5 to 1. So I would divide that 1,000 pounds by 5. So my safe working load would be 200 pounds. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I got a little bit confused. The safety factor divided by the braking strength. I had to think about it for a second, but I got it.
So braking strength, so when this thing's gonna snap, the absolute maximum you can use on it is 1,000. We don't want to load it up that much because that brings it right to the point where it's about to break. We have our safety factor. So if the safety factor is 5 to 1, well, it can do 1/5 of what its braking strength is. Make sense?
Oh yeah, it was just the wording, or not the wording, just had to think about the math.
Shock loading mean when applied to rigging equipment.
Definitely C or D.
Definitely B. Everything else, it has to do with something to do with electricity and
Yeah. So it doesn't, not that kind of shock loading. Although if you worked on a crane that did touch a power line, that kind of shock loading can be very bad too. That's not what they call it, obviously. But it's definitely B. The sling is exposed to stress by having the load suddenly started or stopped. So either way, started or stopped is shock loading. Okay. If you have slack in your rigging and you go ahead and push the load off of a ledge and it catches by the rigging, that was a shock load. Okay.
I talked to a crane operator one time when he was on site with us, and he was pulling out mats that had frozen down onto the ground.
Mhm.
And he said that it's not so much the load being taken off that does it. It's when it bounces and lands back down and puts tension on really fast.
Yeah, I've done that lots.
He could put like 5,500 pounds on that of pull on that mat, and when it came off the ground, if he unwound fast enough and it never bottomed out on the cable, he wouldn't shock load his crane.
Yeah. Yep. Makes sense.
It's tricky business. You do that with barriers too, because barriers get frozen in the ground all the time. So you'll get your picker to pull up on the one corner, and then you get your sledgehammer and you give it a smack. But I don't know if we're allowed to do that. And now I think we just kind of run into them with our bumpers. But.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Like, it's all about if it catches that load, right? Essentially, if you're trying to use it like a fall arrest and it slams down on the cable, that's going to be that shock load. So, yeah. And I think when they mean for starting it, it's if, you know, I've seen a good way of shock loading, if you're thinking about it, would be like if someone's trying to pull you out of the ditch and they have a lot of slack on their line, and then they just give her full throttle and sort of spool up and get going, and then slam that weight right onto the line. So that would be the way that it would be starting too. Yeah. And that essentially, however you're attaining that extreme high spike of tension on the line however you do it, it's still detrimental. So,
Because you got the momentum with the weight.
yep. Yeah. So it's going to be more than it is, right? The force is going to be equal to the mass times the velocity squared. And we'll talk about this when we get into brakes and stuff too. So what is harder to brake? Something that weighs more, something that weighs the same but is traveling twice as fast. So there is a big difference between that as well. What's the safety factor when you're lifting and transporting workers? It's just a number that was in the book. You'd have to read to find it.
D.
10 to 1.
The
It was C.
B.
Work.
10 to 1.
It is 10 to 1. Yeah, workers is 10 to 1. For elevators, for the public, it's 20 to 1. And for just general rigging for a cable, it was 5 to 1. How often must rigging be inspected?
B.
B.
Yeah, just like your crane at the beginning of each work shift or the first time you use it that day. Is the recommended when attaching a hook to an eye bolt?
Nothing less than 60. D.
So
I think that question is not on the new book.
Yep, this question is not in the new
Oh,
book.
I'm on the wrong one. Wait.
Yeah, I was gonna say I only have 13 questions.
You
Yeah.
13? All right. So for
Sorry, last one's 14.
yeah, so 14 is the one everybody has. Somebody said the sling angle must never be less than 60. This is the correct one. So 14.
This one tricked me because the diagram, or on the diagram, it says, 45 is still safe.
I know.
So
And here it says it must never be.
yeah.
Those are very definite terms. Must never be says that 60 degrees and less is no good. So I agree with you. Some of the times the wording is a little bit weird. These first 4 books of mine are probably some of the worst when it comes to this stuff, this wording and stuff like that. So it's going to get a little bit better. But unfortunately, the wording, it has been a problem in the past. Can you all see question 13 now?
yeah.
Yeah, okay. Can you see question 14? For this
Yep.
that I have here? So
No.
I should be screen sharing it.
Or
see
yeah,
no
we
one.
can on your screen. Yeah.
On my screen, okay. So yeah, when attaching an eye hook to an eye bolt, what was the correct answer for that one? Always use a shackle when attaching the hook to the load. They don't even like to talk about eye bolts anymore, so they took this question out. I never particularly like to use them either. Only for smaller loads. Any questions about all this? How's everybody doing so far?
Tired.
So far, so good.
Tired? Someone said tired.
Yeah. Let's do the next one.
Let's do the next one. Sounds good, because that's what we're gonna do. Just keep plugging away.
The hazard one next.
Yep.
Okay.
So 101C. Okay. Hazardous materials and fire protection. If it is, again, while we're going through this, if anybody notices that something is really different, let me know. If I don't notice, I have both ILMs open, but just in case I do not notice.